Hello and welcome to the Daily Space for today, April 21st, 2020. I am your host, Dr. Pamela Gay, and I am here to put science in your brain. Today's news is a bit gassy. We're not quite sure how this happened. While I knew a whole lot of science focused on the parts of the universe that aren't solid or plasma, I hadn't expected the solid stuff to become, so gassy today. As described in no less than 3 press releases and 1 conference proceedings, the planet we thought we'd found around the star Fomalhaut has gone away, dissipating into a cloud of dust and gas. First discovered in 2004, this not still a planet blob, Fomalhaut B, was directly imaged by the Hubble Space Telescope as a small, coherent, planet-looking thing. It was observed repeatedly and continued to shine bright in 2006. But starting in 2008, this world seemed to be expanding, and expansion is not something we expect our planets to do. By the 2014 observations, this world was pretty much gone. The observing team believes that shortly before its discovery images were taken in 2004, this world had a bad collision. According to spacetelescope.org's press release, this object always looked a little bit off. Here's how they describe it. The object was unusually bright in visible light, but did not have any detectable infrared heat signature. Astronomers proposed that the added brightness came from a huge shell or ring of dust encircling the object that may have been collision-related. Now, while the object labeled planet could be explained with a certain amount of hand-waving, what was harder to explain was its path, which wasn't an elliptical orbit so much as an escape trajectory. Now, several years of observing later, scientists have realized it wasn't so much a cloud around a planet as just a cloud. While it may have been vaguely planet-sized to begin with, over time this cloud of dust and gas has expanded to be about the size of Earth's orbit. And at this point in the spread, the light it reflects is just, so spread out that it isn't detectable even to the Hubble Space Telescope. Remarkably, the objects that collided to create this debris cloud didn't have to be that big. The star that this thing didn't quite orbit, the star's Fomalhaut. It is about 25 light years away and is known to be surrounded by a vast ring of icy debris. It's believed the colliding objects may have been icy bodies about 200 kilometers across. The ices would have gone largely to gas from the energy of the collision, transforming 2 solid worlds into a cloud of expanding gas and dust on an escape path out of this distant solar system. The way so many elements like to go to gas when heated the slightest bit is a bit problematic. On our own planet Earth, when our world was first formed and first heated, it probably made all the kinds of gases we now find in our atmosphere just plain go away. Basically, our Earth's atmosphere is made of the kinds of volatile materials that like to escape: nitrogen, carbon dioxide, oxygen. And we know that early on in our planet's history, our world was so hot that all these elements would have been baked out. Over the years, scientists have worked to figure out how oxygen and carbon dioxide probably came back to Earth on comets and asteroids. But nitrogen has been a little bit harder to explain, with 2 different options remaining possible. Either nitrogen had remained trapped deep in the planet and was later dredged up, or nitrogen, just like the oxygen and carbon dioxide, came back to Earth through impacts. But sorting which option was the actual solution to our nitrogen problem has been trying. In a new work, lead author Edward Young puts forward the results of scientists going out and collecting gases from volcanoes, and they did this very carefully. Do not try and replicate this work at home. Well, they went and they looked at the composition of gases coming out of volcanoes, and they found that the gases were consistent with atmospheric gases. And it appears that the nitrogen that is now trapped deep in our Earth was actually brought back to Earth and then added into our planet so that it could come back out later. Basically, the Earth is a giant nitrogen recycling system. So, that nitrogen that makes up 78% of the gas we breathe is nitrogen from impacting comets and asteroids, not nitrogen that was formed as part of the primordial Earth. Understanding the interplay of gases in our atmosphere is hard, even here on Earth, where we can measure pretty much anything we want. But for worlds like Mars, where we at least have rovers in multiple places to sample the air around them, we can start to get a good assessment. But with other worlds like Venus, well, Venus likes to destroy things. So most of what we know has come from passing spacecraft, and even those have been very rare. One way we can essentially get free data is to study Venus with spacecraft on their way to another world or to the sun. One such mission that provided this free extra data was Messenger. When it was on its way to Mercury several years ago, it needed to pass by Venus to get a gravitational assist. And along the way, the instruments on board Messenger were tested out by studying Venus. Now, this June 2007 flyby collected great data about this great beige world of death, but it was hard to get that data processed. Now, as reported in the journal Nature Astronomy, when this data was eventually processed, scientists discovered that the nitrogen concentration in Venus's atmosphere increases with altitude, undergoing basically a step function in concentration above the clouds. Prior to this direct measurement that was acquired to test out a spacecraft, it had been assumed that nitrogen was constant with altitude throughout Venus's clouds. This means we're going to have to rethink the chemical models of the atmosphere of Venus and how these deadly molecules that define Venus's cloud cover may change as a function of altitude. Now, this discovery is pretty awesome, and it's getting used to justify the need for different proposed spacecraft, both here in the United States as well as in Russia. Now, if you hadn't guessed, what is particularly frustrating about this discovery is no one wanted to fund using Messenger's test data for science. When the data was collected in 2007, it was to test the spacecraft. And it was only possible for team members to get time to do the research we've talked about today very recently due to happenstance. Actual proposals to get funding were denied. This is a reminder that often people can't work on projects as volunteers, and science funding is super limited, and even the best data that we already have in our hands can't be processed due simply to a lack of money. We're glad that this team had the endurance and the diligence to keep going until they found a way to do this science. Thank you. Thank you for fighting to do your science. And this rounds out today's episode. As always, this episode comes to you from the Planetary Science Institute, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to exploring our solar system and beyond. This episode was written by me, Dr. Pamela Gay, and will be produced by Susie Murph. Tomorrow is Rocket Wednesday and will come to you from Annie Wilson. So please, if you're watching this on YouTube, know that you can come check us out live on twitch.tv/CosmoQuestX. And we go out at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. That is 6 p.m. London time, most Mondays through Fridays. I am now going to go ahead and answer your questions, so please stick them in the chat. All right, let's see what's going on in here. Scrolling. So Larry asks, is the nitrogen in the soil and in our bodies non-primordial also? As near as we can tell, all the nitrogen that we're dealing with is nitrogen that was brought back to Earth by other objects. The nitrogen in the soil is put there largely by plants that gather it out of the atmosphere and then fixate it into the roots. I think that the nitrogen in our bodies gets there through a combination of breathing the atmosphere and eating things that have nitrogen-rich molecules in them. My chemistry on that one's a little bit shaky, so feel free to verify. So Limperimple says, I found a streamer that you may want to add to your raid list. A Tiny World is a biologist from Ottawa that streams microscopic life. That sounds absolutely amazing. All right, let me go see if I can find their channel. And I'm going to just add them right now while I'm sitting at my computer logged in as the correct person. We are always looking for new people to raid. So thank you so much for the recommendation. And anyone else out there has a good sciencey recommendation, please don't be afraid to add them in. Let's see what else is in here. So many peoples. So many peoples. Good peoples. Not a lot of questions. Today's news was pretty straightforward. So AstroWise asks, so this data about nitrogen in Venus was a lucky thing. They weren't looking for it. So they knew they needed to test the instruments on their spacecraft, and they knew that they were going to be doing some flybys of planets, and they purposefully planned the flyby of Venus so that they could test the instruments, get the data. And there's always scientists doing this planning who are like, someday I will figure out how to use this data for science. But as it works out, especially with European missions, scientists are often funded to command a mission, to run the mission, and get specific data that will go into archives, but they may not have the funding to do the science. That comes through a second process. And so you can end up in a situation, especially again with European missions, where you have this tremendous spacecraft collecting tremendous images, spectra, everything you could ever want, and you just can't get the money to work with it. Now, scientists like me are at institutions where we're allowed to work for free. So this means that a lot of what I do is volunteer activity because right now we just don't have sufficient governmental funding. We have a bunch of grants pending, but it's plague times. We have no idea when we might hear on grants. Now, if you work at a government agency, however, there are actually laws that prohibit you from working for free. This is why when our government shuts down, people aren't allowed to keep working on things. So in this case, we were dealing with mission scientists at one of the NASA funded centers, and they just legally weren't allowed to work on the data, no matter how curious they were and no matter how much good science could come out of it, without funding to pay for their time. And I honestly believe people should be funded for their time. But sometimes you just want to make a science. It's complicated. One of the great problems that we have in science is you can put in a proposal and you can get back all the feedback that is positive, excellent, amazing. But for whatever reason, you still might not get funded. Or you might put in a proposal and it was read by someone who was tired and exhausted and just they didn't read it thoroughly. I've had a proposal back in the early days of podcasting where I was putting in a proposal to create a library of science podcasts. It was turned down because they said the podcast I was on wasn't in the iTunes directory, even though I'd included screenshots of our podcast in the iTunes directory, both under new and notable and in the sidebar as one of the top 10 back when there weren't as many podcasts. That person just hadn't read, but because of their disdainful review, we didn't get any funding and there was nothing we could do about it. So the process of science funding is just like a jury trial. It's filled with humans who are supposed to be fair. It's supposed to be a trial by your peers. But the reality is our peers are often tired. And there's a lot out there. There's a lot competing for funding. And you never know quite what is going to end up impacting your ability to stay funding because it's not an anonymous process. Yeah, it's complicated. Let's see if there's other questions in here. So I need to understand what pre-stream mode means, Keeper of Maps. Does this mean he's about to become a streamer, or does this mean he's about to start his stream for today? So Henny asks, how is all the data saved? Is there a law to update the format as it becomes obsolete? Oh, no, we don't update anything. No, all the raw data is stored in public-facing archives, or if it's physical media, in places where you can get funded to retrieve the data. So there's what's called the planetary data systems that's used for planetary data. There's the Hubble archive, which is used for astronomical data. There's the Canadian Astronomical Data Centers, which is, again, astronomical data. Many different nations have their own online archives that publicly funded data goes into. And again, a lot of people will do science entirely for free. And in fact, the act of writing proposals is something we're not allowed to be paid for. The economics of science really means you're forced to work 60 to 80-hour weeks and might get paid 35. If you're lucky, 9 months out of the year. About to start a stream. Okay, that's good to know. Sounds like Yelp, but with more consequences. That's a fair assessment, Mythtown. Fair assessment. So Tropical Tom asks, how are you doing? Resting well? We don't want you to be tired like the grant reviewer. I'm tired, but it's the old academic story. You do the work you're paid for. You do the work you want to do. That is the reason you got your college degree. You do the things that you know will keep everything going. And then you realize you've been working for 16 hours and go to bed, but your brain won't turn off. And in my case, Eddie keeps howling at something. So for the past 2 nights, I haven't heard it, but we have a grad student currently living in our back bedroom. It's very real genius. And this morning he was like, have you been hearing that Satan sound? And I'm like, no. I thought, first of all, we've been having trucks that look like the trucks they used to spread the mosquito killing stuff in the height of summer. And I don't want to think about what's in those trucks right now. We've had them going down the street late at night. And he's like, no, that's not what it was. I heard this screaming that sounded like a child screaming. And I'm really hoping it was just like cats doing the thing cats sometimes do in the spring. But whatever's the source of the noise, I couldn't hear that noise because I'm on the other side of the house. And what I have known is for the past 2 nights, Eddie, about 2 a.m., has started full-on howling, the whole thing going, head up, howling at the ceiling. And so apparently there's something making screaming child noises that causes Eddie to howl at 2 a.m. Yeah. Weird times. We live in weird times. Someone is playing the new Doom game. That could actually be it. The people in the house behind us, we can see from the second story of our house into their living room. And that means at night you can't help but see their giant television. And I know they play video games. Yeah, Nancy writes, For many of us, tired is the new normal. Tired is the old normal, that is true. Old normal, new normal, tired is the normal. Astrowise writes, would be great to be a scientist at a place like the Perimeter Institute where you can just work and not have to find money. Yeah, but again, to get those positions is so competitive. One of the problems that we run into in the field of science is a lot of universities set the size of their departments in the Apollo era in the early 80s, and they hired a whole lot of faculty. And occasionally you'll get one professor retire here or there, but for the most part, a lot of those hired in the 80s and 70s and sometimes 60s professors are all still in their positions. And new positions are few and far between, but each of those faculty will graduate a PhD student every year or so, sometimes more than that. So you have, for every 7 faculty, maybe 1 position a year, maybe. It's probably more like for every 20 faculty, 1 position opens a year. But all 20 of those faculty will produce a PhD student every other year or so. So this means that for every 1 position that opens up, you're graduating 10 people. And that's just a way of saying that most of us who get our degrees are never going to be professors. And this is also a racist and a biased program. One of the things I've spoken out about quite publicly is I was recruited to Southern Illinois University. I left a permanent position at Harvard because I was an instructor, and the idea of being a faculty member at a university where I could make a real difference really appealed to me, because I knew I'd be working with students that I could open doors to the world for. And I did, and I enjoyed it, and it was awesome. But when a baby faculty asked, hey, why doesn't she have tenure? A senior faculty member quite honestly answered, because she has tits, and we don't give tenure to tits. So the whole process of being a scientist isn't exactly fair. And this plays out all the way down on publication rates, grant rates, tenure rates. And so if you're a woman in science, you generally spend the entirety of your career just trying to be 3 times better so that maybe you can occasionally get funding. It's a hard issue. Truth sucks. Yeah, it's still like that, Hanny. It is actively still like that. There are new papers coming out on a regular basis. So Tropical Tom asks, can a 501c3 be named as a beneficiary in a life insurance policy? Yes, it can. I found a fully paid up life insurance policy that I did not know that I had and don't really have any dependents. Was considering naming several science folks as beneficiaries. Yes. So what you can do is you can actually do this as a named, where it's not just the 501c3, but you can put it in a project and say to endow a chair for scientist so-and-so if they are still in the department. If you talk to universities, they can tell you how to do this. The reason that I know this is one of the members of my dissertation committee passed away while I was in college, and I spontaneously got a scholarship one year that was anonymous, and I later found out that it was his daughter who had figured out how to work within the university system to get me 1 year of funding through basically what was left behind when he passed. I also got his graduation robes, which met Einstein, and I have to say, all these years later, I am very grateful for the scholarship and much more excited about the graduation robes that met Einstein. I have never met Einstein, but I own black graduation robes that have met Einstein. So yes, I know that I personally, if I pay off my student loans, am going to be leaving everything behind in university scholarships for non-traditional students. There are so many people that just aren't ready for university when they finish high school, and they go off and they start their lives and realize, no, I really do want to go back to college. And it's so much harder. And so I want to make it a little bit easier if I can. And I'm just currently at the point of my life insurance pays for me to be buried and pay off some of my student loans. Yeah. So Planetary Pan, I understand what you're saying with doing away with the concept of traditional and non-traditional students, but I think we have to recognize that there is a difference in circumstance for an 18-year-old who has no responsibilities in the world and has never seen anything in the world going to university, and a 28-year-old who's been working, who has a kid, who has a spouse, who has responsibilities, who may even have a mortgage they're trying to pay. That's very different. And because so many scholarships are only open to people who are just graduating from high school, we need to also open doors to make sure that there's, assets to help out those going back to school later in their life. I want to level the playing field a little bit. Like in my perfect universe, every university provides free childcare for every student enrolled in the university. That alone would be tremendous. But that's not the way it works. So yeah, these are the things that get to me sometimes. And we all come at things with both different baggage and different abilities. And let's figure out how to compensate for all of them so that if you have the intellectual ability to be a scientist, you can totally go as far as that intellect can carry you. Yeah, we do need to stop pushing 8-year-olds to go straight to university. Most of them have no idea what they're getting into. And the amount of student loan debt acquired by students who start university in one field, switch degrees, don't know what they're doing, drop out. It's just not fair. Tropical Tom, thank you so much for this sub. Thank you. You are an awesome human. I have got to find my dog camp so that I can go back to throwing goodies to dogs. I had a dog cam and it kept failing, and I had a cheapo camera that I used to travel, and I don't know where the cheapo camera went. I need to find it. Yeah, Mythtown, I understand the glad and sad about not going to college. I know in my family, I used to completely mystify my cousins at Christmas because they all graduated high school, became Adobe workers. 2 of them worked in soccer. A ton of jewelry makers. They were all craftspeople, and they did beautiful, amazing things, earned really solid salaries, had medical insurance, bought houses, all while I was still in college. And so year after year, I was acquiring debt, and they were living, and they were happy, and they were saving for retirement. And I think most of them still earn way more than I do. And a lot of the top computer scientists I know are people who just taught themselves, and that drive to be able to learn on your own. We need to recognize that and celebrate it and help those people go as far as they want instead of forcing them to sit in university classrooms. Yeah, it's all so very complicated. Broken Symmetry's right. A lot of potential gets lost due to a lack of funding, racism, sexism, and lack of mentoring. I had one student, one of the best students I've ever worked with, who one day, he's just like, Prof, what is graduate school? Because he just flat out, he grew up in a small town. His high school didn't even help him go to college. His guidance counselor was deeply confused that he didn't just want to take over his dad's small business. And no one had explained to him just what the university system even was. Yeah. Mythtown, it's okay to be a horrid student as long as you know how to learn. And I know that you know how to learn. Not everyone learns in a classroom. Yeah, Astro Wise writes, it's going to take me forever to finish my degree because I'm paying for it and working and doing it one course at a time. And that's okay. That's okay. Oh, that's awesome, Tropical Tom, that you're going back to college to tackle the math that freaked you out early in life. So there are lots of older people who go back to university, especially when they retire, and I have so much respect for that. Yeah, I have a dear friend who works at NASA who she's probably 5 or 6 years away from retirement, and she's been plugging away at an art history degree. Just finished her master's. I think she's going on to a PhD, and she wants to someday be a docent at a museum when retired. And she's just an amazing human, and it's just such a beautiful story. Yeah. Okay, I need to record this audio, you lovely humans. As I said earlier, tomorrow is Rocket Wednesday. There is also a launch of a Starlink cluster of satellites. One of us will probably cover that. Tomorrow's morning coffee, I think I'm on morning coffee. Long term, we are looking for humans that could be some of you to turn morning coffee into community coffee, where different people just get together and over a time zone appropriate beverage, talk about something they're passionate about, like Astrowise and Keeper of Maps and Paranor and Darren, whose username I don't remember other than it involves squid, did last Friday. So if you have things that you want to talk about, just let us know, and we want to engage you. On Thursday, I will be back doing community coffee. I'm going to be making Rice Krispie treats that look like asteroids. Friday, I don't know Friday yet. It's still too early. So that's things to look ahead to. We are also working on trying to pull together some different interviews. And yeah. You are all fabulously beautiful humans. So there's an interesting thing about Brian May, DPI 209. Brian May was a PhD student when Queen took off, and he took a sabbatical from his PhD work, went off, had a career as a rock god, and then decided to go back and actually finish out what he had started. So he started out as a PhD student, and he just took a few decades sabbatical, as you do, apparently. It's all kind of awesome. Okay. So it's going to be Osiris-Rex related. It's going to be a Bennu asteroid. I don't think I have the skill to make an Osiris-Rex cake. Anyways. I am going to look into wrapping this episode up so I can record the podcast and work on doing all the things that need done around here. Alrighty, so who would you like to raid? Is Ambius live now? Can somebody I can check. What am I doing? I can check these things. Slowly load the internets. Slowly load the internets. Thank you, the way it goes. Thank you. You are an excellent human. Excellent human. All right. So it does not want to let me click. There we go. Ambius is streaming Alex. We're gonna raid him because he is a community member and we want to support him in his new streaming habit. So go hang out with him and give him a wonderful Rocky welcome. And he does need more viewers. So wherever you are in the world, I need to tell you who we are and what we are first. This has been The Daily Space. I am your host, Dr. Pamela Gay, and I wrote today's episode, which will be produced by Susie Murph. We are a product of the Planetary Science Institute, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to exploring our solar system and beyond. We are here thanks to the generous contributions and volunteer efforts of people like you. Your bits, your subs, your patronage at patreon.com/CosmoQuestX all allow us to pay our staff a livable wage, which is sometimes all you need. Your volunteer efforts allow us to keep things going forward. We are so very grateful for everything that you do. And we just want to say, wherever you are in the world, have a fabulous morning, evening, and afternoon, and wash your hands and stay inside.